My name is Claire Bennett. I am 36 years old. And at 2:07 this morning, a hospital called to tell me my father had suffered a stroke. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was calm, in the way hospital voices are trained to be calm when something has already gone wrong. The woman asked whether I was Claire Bennett, daughter of Robert Bennett. I almost said no. Not because the name was wrong, but because daughter had never felt like an accurate description of what remained between us. Instead, I said, biologically, yes. There was a brief pause before she explained that my father had been brought in unconscious, that my mother was with him, and that the medical team needed to speak with someone listed as an emergency contact. I looked at the clock again. 2:07 a.m. For 23 years. My parents had barely called, unless a holiday required it. Now, a hospital had reached me before sunrise because my name had somehow been placed beside the word emergency. I asked why my mother could not make the decisions. The woman lowered her voice and said, my mother was overwhelmed. My younger brother was overseas. My father could not speak for himself. Your mother said you work in critical care. She added. That was when I understood I had not been called because I was missed. I had been called because I was useful. I told the woman I would call back after speaking with the physician. Then I ended the call and remained seated at my kitchen table in the dark. The apartment was silent, except for the refrigerator motor and the distant sound of tires moving across wet streets. I opened the drawer beside me and took out a small silver bracelet. The metal had dulled with age, but the engraving was still visible. Home. My mother had fastened it around my wrist the day they left me at St. Miriam's boarding school. I was 13. The school stood behind black iron gates outside a small Pennsylvania town, surrounded by bare trees and stone buildings that looked older than the road leading to them. My parents told me I would stay for one term while things settled at home. My brother, Nathan, had been born with a heart condition, and by then, his appointments, surgeries, and emergencies had reorganized the entire household. I had learned not to complain when dinner was canceled, when birthdays were postponed, or when my parents forgot to collect me from school. But at 13, I still asked questions. I asked why Nathan's fear mattered more than mine. I asked why every room in our house seemed to belong to his illness. I asked whether being healthy meant I was allowed to be ignored. 3 weeks later, my parents enrolled me at St. Miriam's Plotter. My father called it stability. My mother called it temporary. On arrival day, she knelt in front of me, closed the bracelet around my wrist, and said, "So you never forget where you belong." My father carried my suitcase up the steps but did not enter the dormitory. He checked his watch twice while a nun explained visiting weekends. My mother promised they would come the following month. Then Nathan began coughing in the back seat, and both of them turned toward the car before I had finished saying goodbye. I stood beneath the stone archway and watched them leave. For the first few weeks, I believed every promise. I marked the first visiting Sunday on the calendar beside my bed. I imagined my mother bringing the cinnamon rolls she made on cold mornings. I imagined my father asking to see my classroom. When the day arrived, I sat in the common room facing the front windows. Families came through the gates carrying flowers, bags of food, and folded coats. Every time a car slowed near the entrance, I touched the bracelet on my wrist. By evening, the chairs around me were empty. A nun asked whether I wanted supper brought upstairs. I told her my parents were delayed. The next month, I used the same explanation. Then the next. They did not visit at Christmas. They did not visit on my birthday. They did not attend the spring concert, the award ceremony, or the day I was hospitalized with pneumonia. During 4 years at St. Miriam's, my parents never crossed those gates once. But that was not the part that stayed with me most. The hardest part was learning that during those same years, they never stopped showing up, They attended every hospital fundraiser for Nathan, every school event he could manage, every appointment in every city his doctors recommended. They had not become incapable of being present. They had simply decided where their presence mattered. And now, 23 years later, a hospital was asking me to return the care they had once chosen not to give. At St. Miriam's, visiting Sundays were announced by sound before they were visible. Car doors slammed beyond the courtyard. Tires rolled over loose gravel. Voices rose beneath the stone archway as parents called their daughters' names. By 8 in the morning, the common room smelled of coffee, perfume, and food brought from outside. I learned to recognize those sounds without looking toward the windows. For the first year, I still looked. I chose the same chair near the entrance every month and left the one beside me empty. I told myself it was practical. My mother would need somewhere to place her coat. My father would want to sit before asking about my grades. By late afternoon, when the last visitors began leaving, I pushed both chairs back beneath the table and returned upstairs. I never packed a bag. St. Miriam's did not allow students to leave campus without written approval, and my parents never sent any. Instead, I kept a small list inside my desk drawer of things I planned to tell them when they arrived. I wrote that I had been chosen to read at morning assembly. I wrote that Sister Agnes said my essays were unusually precise. I wrote that I had learned how to braid my own hair because no one in the dormitory had time to help before classes. Each month, the list grew longer. Each month, I folded it smaller. By the end of my first year, it fit inside the silver bracelet box my mother had packed with my things. On my 14th birthday, a parcel arrived from home. I carried it upstairs before opening it because I wanted the moment to remain private. The box was taped unevenly, and for several seconds, I believed my mother had rushed while wrapping something special. Inside was a navy sweater that belonged to Nathan. I knew it immediately from the small tear near the cuff. In one pocket, I found 2 ticket stubs from a baseball game and a folded note in my father's handwriting. "We are so proud of you. You were brave today." The note was meant for my brother. The parcel had been addressed to me by mistake. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the sweater against my knees. The pain was not that Nathan had received praise. He had endured surgeries, medication, and fear no child should have known. I did not resent him for being loved. What hurt was discovering that my parents still knew how to write the words I had been waiting to hear. They had not forgotten the language. They had simply stopped using it with me. I returned the sweater through the school office and received a brief call from my mother 3 days later. She apologized for the mix-up, then spent most of the conversation explaining how exhausted Nathan had been after the game. Before we ended, I asked whether they planned to visit the following month. There was a pause. Then she said, "This family has to focus on what matters most right now." She did not sound cruel. That made the sentence worse. Cruelty can be rejected. Calm certainty is harder to argue with. I looked down at the bracelet around my wrist and understood that home had become a word my mother could engrave on silver while quietly removing me from its meaning. After that call, I stopped wearing it. I placed it inside my pencil case beneath spare erasers and broken clips. I did not throw it away. At 14, I was still careful with promises, even after the people who made them were not. The clearest proof that my absence had been planned came later that winter. I developed pneumonia and spent 6 nights in the school infirmary. Sister Agnes contacted my parents twice. They declined to come, explaining that travel might expose Nathan to infection. I accepted that explanation until I learned they had attended a hospital fundraiser in Philadelphia during the same week. A photograph appeared in the local paper. My mother wore the blue dress she saved for important occasions. My father stood beside Nathan beneath a banner bearing the hospital's name. They were smiling. I clipped the photograph and kept it inside my biology book. Not because I wanted to punish myself, but because facts had become safer than excuses. Near the end of that school year, I found another fact. While helping the administrative secretary organize student files, I saw my own name on a document marked parental authorization. My parents had transferred broad educational and medical decision-making authority to St. Miriam's. At the bottom was an additional request: non-essential calls home should be limited because Claire adjusts better without family disruption. I read the sentence twice. Their absence was not the result of missed trains, medical emergencies, or impossible schedules. They had told the school that their presence would interfere with my adjustment. They had turned abandonment into a treatment plan. That was the year I stopped counting the days until they came and started counting the ways they had already moved on. By 15, I had stopped choosing the chair near the common room window. Visiting Sundays still came with the same sounds: car doors, footsteps, parents calling names, but I no longer arranged my day around them. Instead, I began spending those afternoons in the school infirmary. Sister Miriam, who supervised it, first asked me to help because I was quiet and did not panic when another student fainted during chapel. My tasks were simple: refill water pitchers, fold clean sheets, record temperatures, sit beside girls who were waiting for medication to work. I liked the order of it. A fever had a number. A wound could be cleaned. A frightened person could be helped by someone who stayed in the room. Nothing about the infirmary depended on pretending absence was care. Sister Miriam noticed that I remained calm even when others became distressed. One winter night, a younger student woke with severe abdominal pain and began crying for her mother. While Sister Miriam called the doctor, I sat beside the bed and counted breaths with her until the ambulance arrived. The next morning, Sister Miriam said, "You are good at staying when people are afraid." The sentence followed me for years. At St. Miriam's, adults often described me as independent. They wrote it in progress reports and scholarship recommendations. They meant disciplined, capable, low maintenance. What they could not see was that independence had not begun as confidence. It had begun as adaptation. I learned to braid my own hair because no one was coming to do it. I learned to sign permission forms at the office because my parents rarely returned them. I learned not to ask for comfort because being told to understand Nathan's needs hurt more than silence. Still, the skills became real, even if their origin was not. I joined the Health Sciences Club, earned top marks in biology, and spent school breaks helping in the infirmary instead of waiting for invitations home. Sister Miriam encouraged me to apply for a state nursing scholarship. She said I had the temperament for critical care, steady hands, careful attention, and the ability to hear what frightened people were not saying. I did not tell her those qualities had been built in rooms where no one came when I was frightened. Near the end of my final year, the headmistress asked me to visit her office. She was preparing records for transfer and said there was something I had a right to see now that I was almost 18. She placed a thin folder on the desk. Inside were copies of letters my parents had sent throughout my time at St. Miriam's. The earliest was dated 11 days after they dropped me off. My father requested that the school discourage unnecessary calls home. My mother added that family visits might confuse Claire's adjustment and that consistency would be better for everyone. A later letter declined an invitation to my academic ceremony because Nathan had a routine cardiology appointment the following week. Another authorized the school to make medical decisions without contacting them unless my condition became life-threatening. At the bottom of each page were both their signatures. Their absence had not happened because life kept interfering. It had been discussed, justified, and put in writing. The headmistress apologized. She said the school had assumed my parents knew what was best. I told her I understood. By then, I had learned that institutions often mistake parental certainty for parental care. On graduation morning, I opened the pencil case where I had kept the silver bracelet for nearly 4 years. The word home was faint beneath the scratches. I fastened it around my wrist for the first time since my 14th birthday. It no longer felt like proof that I belonged to my parents. It felt like a question I would answer for myself. My parents did not attend the ceremony. Nathan had a hospital fundraiser that evening, and my mother emailed that travel would be too difficult. I did not reply. Sister Miriam stood in the audience and clapped when my name was called. Afterward, she handed me the scholarship letter that would cover most of my nursing degree. I left St. Miriam's carrying one suitcase, a folder of records, and the bracelet my mother had given me as a promise she never kept. But this time, I was not being sent away. I was choosing where to go. Years later, the family who believed I adjusted better without them would call because they could not adjust without me. College was the first place where my presence did not feel like an inconvenience someone had learned to manage. I arrived with one suitcase, a scholarship letter, and the silver bracelet fastened around my wrist. This time, no one had driven me away from home. I had chosen the city, the campus, and the future waiting beyond the dormitory doors. I studied nursing because the infirmary at St. Miriam's had taught me something my family never had when people are afraid. Presence matters. Illness did not frighten me as much as uncertainty did. A monitor could be read, a medication could be measured, a patient could be watched closely enough that small changes were noticed before they became disasters. I liked that responsibility had visible forms. During my first clinical rotation, I was assigned to an elderly woman recovering from heart surgery. She had no visitors and asked the same question every hour: did anyone call each time? I checked the chart even though I already knew the answer. On the third day, I sat beside her after my shift ended and listened while she described the daughter who had not spoken to her in years. I did not offer false reassurance. I simply stayed until she fell asleep. My instructor later told me I needed to protect my time if I wanted to survive in medicine. She was right. But I also understood that efficiency without humanity could become another form of abandonment. I learned to balance both. I worked nights, accepted every scholarship I qualified for, and spent summers as a hospital aide. My first year as a registered nurse was harder than school. Knowledge did not prepare me for the speed of an emergency room or the way families sometimes turned panic into blame. After a young patient deteriorated unexpectedly, I explained the situation too clinically to his parents. The facts were correct, but my voice left no room for their fear. The patient recovered. Yet I remembered the mother's expression long afterward. It taught me that calm was not the same as distance. Real calm made space for truth without making people feel abandoned inside it. I carried that lesson into intensive care. Over time, I became the nurse physicians, trusted during difficult nights, and the person younger staff called when a family could not understand what was happening. I did not raise my voice. I asked precise questions. I repeated explanations without making anyone feel foolish. Eventually, I became a charge nurse, then the head nurse of a critical care unit. The title mattered less to me than the culture I built around it. No patient was left alone during a major change in condition. No family received important news in a hallway. No frightened staff member was shamed for asking for help. I had spent too much of my childhood learning what happened when adults treated presence as optional. My relationship with my parents narrowed into a few messages each year. My mother sent birthday texts that arrived late in the evening. My father forwarded articles about hospital policy as though professional interest could substitute for conversation. Nathan occasionally sent photographs from family dinners or charity events. I replied politely and never asked why no one had thought to include me. By then, the question no longer controlled me. I built a quiet life near the hospital, with a small apartment, a dependable group of friends, and routines that made room for rest. The bracelet remained in my bedside drawer most days. I no longer needed to wear the word home to prove I had one. I had built it through consistency, trust, and the knowledge that the people around me would notice if I disappeared. Then, at 20:07 one morning, my phone rang. The hospital operator asked whether I was Claire Bennett. Daughter of Robert Bennett. I answered carefully. Biologically? Yes. She told me my father had suffered a severe stroke. My mother was too distressed to understand the treatment options. Nathan was overseas and could not return immediately. Then she added, "Your mother said you work in critical care." The sentence settled into the room with perfect clarity. For 23 years, my parents had treated my strength as evidence that I needed less from them. Now that same strength had become the reason they needed me. The physician came on the line and began explaining the scan results, the risks, and the decisions that could not wait until morning. I listened, asked questions, and took notes on the back of an unopened envelope. When the call ended, I opened the drawer beside my bed and looked at the silver bracelet. At 13, it had represented a home I kept waiting to return to. At 36, it represented the distance I had crossed without them. I did not know yet whether I would go to the hospital, but I understood one thing. Before I stood from the table, they had not called me back into the family. They had called me into a decision. My mother answered on the first ring. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the mechanical rhythm of the hospital in the background, wheels passing over tile, a monitor sounding somewhere nearby, a voice calling for respiratory therapy. Then she said my name, as though she had been repeating it to herself. Claire. Thank God. I did not correct her. I asked to speak with the physician. She said he had already explained everything, but she did not understand what he wanted her to decide. Her words came quickly now. My father had collapsed in the kitchen. The ambulance arrived within 11 minutes. The scan showed a large clot. There had been discussion of a procedure, but there were risks, and Nathan was trying to join by video from an airport in Frankfurt. She said my father had always been healthy. She said none of this made sense. I listened until she ran out of sentences. Then I asked the only question that mattered before anything else. Why is my name on his emergency contact form? The silence that followed was different from panic. It was recognition. My mother lowered her voice. She said my father had updated the paperwork 2 years earlier. He knew I worked in critical care. He thought I would understand hospital language if something happened. Did he tell you? He added me, I asked. No. She said. We did not think it was necessary. I looked at the silver bracelet on my kitchen table. For 23 years, they had treated contact with me as unnecessary, but they had quietly stored my name beside the instructions for crisis. My mother began speaking again before I could respond. She said Nathan had responsibilities overseas. She said he had children, a demanding job, and a complicated travel schedule. She said I was closer, calmer, better with medical decisions. Each sentence sounded like praise until I heard the purpose beneath it. Strong, capable, practical. Those were the words people used when they wanted something difficult from a person they had already trained, not to ask for anything in return. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. She hesitated, then admitted the doctors wanted consent for a thrombectomy. My father had arrived within the treatment window, but his condition was worsening because he could not speak and his advance directive was outdated. The team needed the family to agree. My mother was afraid the procedure might kill him. Nathan wanted every possible intervention, but had not heard the full explanation. And you want me to decide? I said. I want you to help us understand. She replied. The distinction was careful, but the burden was the same. I asked her to place the attending physician on the line. He spoke plainly. The clot was extensive. Without intervention, my father faced a high risk of permanent disability or death. The procedure carried serious risk, but it was the only meaningful chance of restoring blood flow. I asked about his baseline health, the time of onset, the imaging score, and whether there had been any indication of prior wishes. The physician answered each question. My mother remained silent. When he finished, I told him I would come in, but that I was not accepting legal authority until the family understood the options. After the call, my mother whispered, "I knew you would know what to do." The words unsettled me more than desperation would have proven. She had known where I worked. She had known what I had become. My father had known enough to place my name on a form. They had followed my life closely enough to depend on my competence, but not closely enough to ask how that life had been built. I drove to the hospital through empty streets while the city still slept. The entrance lights reflected across the wet pavement. Inside, I found my mother sitting beneath a television she was not watching. She looked older than I expected. But the first thing she said was not hello. "Nathan is trying to connect." A nurse led us into a consultation room. My brother appeared on a screen from an airport lounge, his face pale and impatient. He said we should authorize everything. My mother looked at me. The physician repeated the risks. I translated nothing. I only slowed the language down and asked them both to say what they understood. Nathan became frustrated. My mother began crying. Then she reached for my hand and said, "Claire, please. You are the strong one." I moved my hand gently out of reach. "Why did Dad choose me?" I asked. She looked toward the closed door. Finally, she said he had followed my career for years. He knew when I became charge nurse. He knew when I took over the unit. He had even kept a newspaper clipping from an award ceremony. "Then why did he never call?" I asked. My mother had no answer that did not reveal the truth. He had not wanted a relationship. He had wanted a reliable option. For the first time in 23 years, they were waiting for me to show up. The question was whether I would arrive as their daughter or only as the professional they needed. The consultation room was too small for 4 people, and a screen. My mother sat beside me with both hands wrapped around a paper cup she had not touched. Nathan's face appeared from an airport lounge in Frankfurt, delayed by a weak connection that froze his expression every few seconds. The attending physician stood near the wall with the scan images displayed behind him. He explained the procedure again, this time more slowly. My father still had a narrow window for intervention. The clot could be removed. But there were risks: bleeding, further damage, death. Without the procedure, the likelihood of severe disability was high. My mother kept looking at me instead of the doctor. Nathan said, "Do everything," as if urgency could replace understanding. I asked him what he believed everything meant. He stared at the screen. "It means saving him." The physician answered carefully. "It means accepting serious risk for a chance at recovery." Nathan's jaw tightened. My mother whispered that she could not make the wrong decision. I told her there was no option without risk. There was only the choice most consistent with what my father would have wanted. She shook her head. "You know him better in situations like this." I looked at her. "I know the medicine. You know your husband." She lowered her eyes. The distinction mattered. I would not allow my knowledge to become another way for them to place responsibility on me. The physician asked whether my father had ever discussed quality of life, disability, or treatment preferences. My mother said he hated the idea of depending on anyone. Nathan interrupted and insisted that meant he would want every intervention possible. I asked whether my father had completed a current advance directive. He had not. There was an older document, but it covered only prolonged life support after irreversible injury. It did not answer the decision in front of us. My mother reached for my hand again. "Claire, please. We need you." I moved my hand onto the table before she could touch it. "You need my calm," I said. "You never wanted my presence." No one spoke. The monitor outside the room sounded twice before a nurse silenced it. Nathan looked away from the camera. My mother's face changed. Not with shock, but recognition. She said this was not the time to discuss the past. I agreed. "Then do not use family to make me carry the decision." The physician remained silent, giving us space without pretending not to hear. My mother began crying quietly. She said Nathan had been sick so often when we were children. Every trip, every school event, every choice had been measured against what might happen to him. I told her I understood that. I had always understood it. What I had never understood was why caring for one child required disappearing from the life of another. She pressed the paper cup between her palms until the lid bent. "We thought you were stronger," she said. "You needed less." The words were familiar, but this time there was no careful language around them. I asked whether that was why they never visited. She hesitated, then nodded. Traveling to St. Miriam's would have meant leaving Nathan with relatives or bringing him into an environment they considered stressful. My father believed each visit might make him feel less important, so they decided consistency was better. For him, you chose his comfort over my existence. I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. Nathan protested that he had been a child and had known nothing about it. I told him I did not blame him. He had been protected from the cost of their choices just as I had been forced to absorb it. My mother said they believed I would adjust. I did. I answered. That does not make the decision harmless. The physician asked whether we needed more time. I looked at my mother and told her the medical facts once more. The procedure offered the only meaningful chance of reducing permanent damage. It also carried real danger. The legal decision was hers. I would answer questions, but I would not choose for her and later become responsible for the outcome. Nathan finally stopped insisting and asked what I would recommend if the patient were not our father. I told him I would recommend intervention based on the timing, imaging, and likely prognosis. My mother closed her eyes, then authorized the procedure. After the physician left, she asked whether I would stay. I said I would remain until my father was out of surgery. I would help the staff understand his history. I would not move into their home, coordinate long-term care, or become the person everyone called whenever the consequences became difficult. Nathan said we could discuss that later. No, I replied. This is when it has to be clear. My mother looked at me with the same uncertainty I had carried at 13. I felt compassion for her. But compassion did not erase structure. The real decision was not whether I would help save my father. It was whether saving him required me to abandon myself again. My father survived the procedure. The clot was removed before the damage became irreversible. But recovery was slow and uncertain. For the first 2 days, he remained sedated while the medical team watched for swelling and bleeding. I stayed until the surgeon spoke with my mother, then went home before sunrise. I returned the following afternoon. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I had chosen to. That distinction mattered. I answered questions, reviewed the rehabilitation plan, and helped my mother understand what the next months might require. I did not take over. When she asked whether I could arrange home nursing, I gave her the names of 3 agencies and told her how to compare them. When Nathan finally arrived from Europe, I handed him a folder containing the medication list, insurance contacts, and follow-up schedule. He looked surprised. You already organized everything, he said. I organized what the hospital needed. I replied, the rest belongs to the family that stayed. He did not argue. For the first time, he seemed to understand that my competence did not make me available without limits. My father opened his eyes on the 3rd day. His speech was weak, and one side of his face did not move properly. I stood at the foot of the bed while my mother told him I had come. His eyes found mine slowly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I had imagined that moment in different forms over the years: anger, apology, explanation, perhaps even recognition. In reality, there was only the sound of the monitor and the effort it took him to form a word. Claire, he said. It was barely audible. I stepped closer. He tried again, but the sentence would not come. His hand moved slightly against the blanket. I could see frustration rising in his face. I could also see fear, not the fear of death. The fear of having waited too long to say something that might now remain unfinished. I did not rescue him from that feeling. But I did not punish him with it either. "You do not have to fix this today," I said. His eyes closed. A tear moved toward his temple. I stayed for 10 more minutes, then left the room. My mother followed me into the hallway. She apologized there, quietly and without asking me to make her feel better. She said they had convinced themselves I needed less, because believing that was easier than admitting they were giving me less. She said every year they did not visit made the next year harder, until avoidance became the structure of the family. I listened. An apology does not become false because it arrives late. But lateness still has consequences. "I believe you regret it," I told her. "That does not mean we return to what we were." She nodded. There was relief in her face. Not because I had forgiven everything, but because I had answered honestly. Over the following months, my father entered rehabilitation. Nathan adjusted his work schedule and took responsibility for most appointments. My mother learned how to manage medication and home care. They sent me updates once a week. I read them when I had time. Sometimes I replied. Sometimes I did not. I visited my father once more, after he regained enough speech to hold a short conversation. He said St. Miriam's had been a mistake. I did not tell him it had been more than that. He already knew. I also did not ask him to explain why he had followed my career from a distance while refusing to call. Some answers do not repair anything. They only give old pain new vocabulary. Before leaving, I placed the silver bracelet on the table beside his bed. He looked at the engraved word, and then at me. "Home," he said slowly. I picked it up again and fastened it around my wrist. "Not anymore," I told him. "Now, it means something else." I wore it home that evening, then placed it in a small wooden box beside my nursing pin. I did not hide it in a drawer. I did not display it as a wound. It became evidence of the girl I had been and the woman she had managed to become. Calm is not forgetting. Calm is not agreement. It is the freedom to choose without letting anger make the choice for you. My parents never visited me at boarding school, and no late apology could change that. But when the hospital called at 2 a.m, I learned that showing up did not mean returning to the family that abandoned me. It meant standing beside the past without allowing it to decide where I belonged. That night taught me that being capable is not the same as being available for everyone's crisis. Strength does not erase the years when no one came. Knowledge does not turn abandonment into a debt. And compassion does not require a person to step back into the same role that once broke them. I could explain the medicine without becoming the family's missing structure. I could help my mother understand the risks without carrying the guilt of the choice. I could stand in a hospital room without pretending the boarding school years had been harmless. That was the lesson I had waited too long to learn. Presence is meaningful only when it is chosen freely. If people return to you only when they need your steadiness, you are allowed to give help with limits, truth without bitterness, and care without surrendering yourself again. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.